Thank you everyone for being here. It's wonderful to see you. Welcome, welcome. And thank you for choosing your session above all the many other wonderful sessions. I hope that this session will prove to be useful for you, or at least hopefully productive. So what I will do is just to introduce our guidelines, which is actually the main topic of this of this workshop. So as you know, we now have what we call the Beyond Guidelines for preventing and addressing research misconduct. So how is this? What is new? What's different about this? Right. So let me before that. So I want to say that this is a project coordinated from the University of Oslo by myself. But we have a lot of wonderful partners all over Europe. Now, just 2 slides on the Beyond project. Though maybe you already know a little bit about us. So as you know, this is a 36-month, 3-year project. And the goal of which is to move beyond the bad apples approach. Right? Meaning that we don't want to see misconduct simply as an individual affair, as an individual problem. Rather, we want to see the orchard instead of just that one bad apple, and then another bad apple, then another bad apple being produced, because then we know that things are always much more complex, right? So we want to see research misconduct from a very so we say complexity perspective, from an environment. If you want to say it this way, from a more environmental perspective, by environment referring to the research environment. Right, so we've used several methods in this project. We have behavioral and evidence-based approaches. This is one of those CSAs, and maybe the only CSA that I know, where we actually did little experiments, and that was actually very interesting. We've had very interesting results. Of course, being a CSA, we also have co-creation stakeholder public consultations, such as this one, and we come up with guidelines, training materials, roadmaps, and many other basic research that would go within. So if you see, we have explore, engage, guide, and equip. These would be like the summary, the 4 words that summarize the entire project, at least the activities of the project. And the key outputs would be many things, but at least for this session, what I want to highlight would simply be our best practice manual and our guidelines. So along with the guidelines that we will talk about today, we also have what we call the best practice manual. So the guidelines will of course be on a high level, providing us with principles and stuff. But the manual is there, to bring it down, hopefully, to a level that's a little bit more concrete, a little bit more applicable. Okay. For today, we will be talking about the guidelines. We will also have a 2030 roadmap for research integrity, and of course, we already have training materials and tools for institutions, which are now being piloted. Or maybe I think the pilot session, the pilot phase probably has ended, and now we're collating all of that and improving our training materials. Yeah. So in the end, why are we doing why the Beyond projects? Yeah? So of course, we want to contribute to a better research environment, an environment that's less punitive. Yeah. But an environment that actually is more, I would say, honest in terms of what causes research misconduct. Yeah, it's not an environment that does not search for that one person. An environment looks into the environment, but a research environment that looks upon itself and see what can be changed, what can be improved in this research environment to make it something that allows for research integrity. Of course, contribute to trust in science and a supportive, inclusive research culture. Now, going back to the very purpose of this workshop today. So what I will do is just to talk a little bit about the guidelines, which you probably already know because the guidelines should have been distributed to you. And as I've mentioned, this is the main purpose of this workshop. So there are several guiding principles of the Beyond Guidelines true to the spirit of the project. So first is the need for, we acknowledge that when you talk of misconduct, this must be a shared responsibility. Yeah. So meaning that when a researcher is charged with misconduct, in fact, responsibility does not lie only on that researcher, but also to institutions, to funders, policymakers, and even journals, for example. As I mentioned a while ago, we want to look at the research environment. So this is what we call an ecosystem approach. You also want to call it maybe complexity approach, to matters. So we are looking at misconduct from a structural, cultural, psychological, and institutional perspective. Because in any human affairs, such as research, it's never as simple as that one factor. It's rooted, of course, in the European Code of Conduct. So we honor the principles of reliability, honesty, respect, and accountability. At the same time, the emphasis of the project is on prevention, learning, and improvement over punitive practices, punishment. We are not saying that we should do away with punishment or punitive practices, but we're saying that it's much more complex than that. So another thing is, so here, the Beyond Guidelines is also geared more towards prevention and education, as I've said, because we want to look beyond the punitive approach. So first is, we state that there is the need to foster ethical research cultures and positive work environments. So one of the big topics that we research in the Beyond Project is what we call nudges. And also, what are the effects of nudges? Now, nudges is as simply as if you design a specific setting, for example, a research setting, or even this classroom. If I design a classroom in a particular way, it somehow affects how people react to that. That's simply the whole foundation of the whole topic of nudging, right? So we are all somehow architects or constructors of something. And so in a research environment, everyone has the capacity to make decisions, somehow nudge in one way or another. But how can we use that knowledge of nudging, that environment matters and how human beings react, in such a way that it makes it much more easier, that makes it much easier to perform ethically, to perform with integrity. And because we can't have all of these conflicting messages, yeah? One is like, you need to get more funds, you need to publish more, and at the same time, be as ethical and very good researcher as you can. It becomes a super it sounds like, it starts to sound like a supererogatory responsibility, and we cannot expect that from each and every single human being. It's too much, yeah? So what we're saying is foster ethical research cultures and positive work environments, offer training and transparent procedures for research misconduct prevention, and this is very important, So when you talk about research misconduct approaches, these must be procedures that are transparent. We're not saying that everything must be known, but the procedure in itself must be understood. Okay? Use behavioral nudges, as I mentioned a while ago, to encourage ethical decision making, promote mental health and well-being for all researchers. In fact, factor that in. When we're talking about a research environment, we can never forget about mental health. Because if an environment stresses too much to the point that it is not healthy towards mental health, of course you can expect much more misconduct cases. Yeah, but more importantly, we are poisoning the very researchers we expect to act ethically. Okay, so here I want to say, in the Beyond Project, especially in the guidelines, I want to say that institutions must design environments where good research practices are the easiest and most natural choice. Yeah, where research environment are the easiest and most natural choice. Okay. Next, when it comes to handling misconduct, so what I'm doing now is just to break down the principles that underlie the guidelines. Next, when it comes to handling misconduct, so we're saying, as I mentioned a while ago, if there is an issue of misconduct, this must be, the procedures must be transparent. Of course, the procedure must be fair. And more importantly, the procedure must be timely. Yeah? Because the more time you consume, if it's not timely, if you don't address it right away, you can already imagine how that pollutes the research environment, right? Another is, of course, protecting whistleblowers and ensure confidentiality, especially junior researchers, because the risk of retaliation is very high. You probably know, I know at the top of my head, I can already think of individuals who were whistleblowers and who were affected by the fact that they did whistleblowing. Yeah? We need to prevent stigmatization of the accused individuals before investigations conclude, because we don't presume that they're guilty before the conclusion of any investigation. And independent oversight to ensure institutional accountability. Yeah? Meaning that, again, we don't just look into the bad apple, but we want to look into how the institution must be held accountable too, for what happened, at least in terms of how can the institution change its ways to not create another bad apple and another bad apple and another bad apple. So make procedures credible, transparent, and trustworthy. Next, when it comes to rehabilitation and reintegration, so we're saying that there must be support, sufficient support. And what is sufficient support? So you might want to consult the guidelines and what it says. Anyway, there must be sufficient support for researchers after research misconduct cases, both the cleared ones and the confirmed ones. Of course, confirmed cases of research misconduct, so researchers who were found to be guilty of research misconduct, what do we mean by sufficient support? So that means balancing accountability, with path to reintegration. Yeah? But of course, if a researcher has been cleared, then please pave the way for reintegration pathways of training and mentoring. Yeah? Focus on learning, fairness, and inclusion, and not just punishment, and build a culture of reflection and trust within institutions. So the summary here will be moved from a culture of fear and blame to a culture of learning, fairness, and inclusion, where institutions and individuals can recover and improve. Yeah? And that, if we say it that way, it's much more easier to be human and at the same time a researcher in an environment that acknowledges that we can make mistakes. Or an environment which sees that mistakes are possible and not only grave misconduct. Of course, there's the possibility of grave misconduct, but so are mistakes. Yeah. How about research ethics? So another aspect of our guideline is the integration of research ethics training and capacity building. And here are some of the principles that develop evidence-based research ethics and research integrity training across all career stages. That include topics such as research ethics, integrity principles, whistleblower protection and fair investigations, mentoring, supervision, and leadership responsibilities. We also mentioned the use of innovative tools, and by innovative tools, I mean, you can imagine, the plethora of possibilities. Yeah. So case studies, gamified learning, use of new technologies such as immersive technologies. I give the word immersive technologies because that's another set of technology that we are researching on. And ensure evaluation of training impacts. I mean, you can't just say, okay, we trained them. But then a lot of studies have shown that different ways of training would have different levels of impact. Yeah? And this is again another work package in the Beyond project. So there's one work package that really simply looked at the effects of research ethics and research integrity training and education. How long, what type of impact can we expect from the type of training and education that we give. Yeah. So here, ensure evaluation of training impact, attitudes, behaviors, long-term culture, and change. And here as a form of a summary, yeah. So the Beyond guidelines would want to promote in the end public trust, supporting cultures and political sensitivity, public trust, engage openly with society about research integrity efforts, supportive cultures create safe spaces for raising concerns without fear, political sensitivity, address risks when research misconduct allegations intersect with political or ideological conflicts in learning systems. Institutions should review each case to improve processes and policies.
Okay, I'll try to. We didn't finish the 6 assumptions. We stopped at number 5. And well, we sort of agreed on most of it, but not totally agree.
Which one was it?
Especially number 4. Well, I'm just saying the last number,
Yeah.
so not 2.3, 1.4. So 0.4 wasn't really, and if my memory works, is also 0.3 that wasn't total agreement. But I'll start with number 1. So we put number 1 at low feasibility, but difficult but valuable if done. So we discussed the freedom of speech related to that assumption that it's something that yes we have to put forward, and that it varies from one discipline to another, and especially social sciences tend to be like less valued by the population, so there's perhaps more work to do for researcher in the field of social science. If you want to add something, or I'm missing something, yeah, okay. Point 2, we had like trouble like how we choose a case, or do we choose a researcher or some good practices, do we put awards, anyways we had different discussions related to that assumption, and we put it like it has some high impact and it's high feasibility, but a little bit less than number 4. So we sort of agree that it's important, but we still have things to figure out for that one.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
I don't think we have time to go through all of them, but can you pick up one that you had the most discussion about, which was the most controversial or the most praised?
Maybe number 2. Number 2 that I just
about choosing best practice examples.
Yes.
Because we were unified that it's a good idea to publish best examples of practice, but how to choose what are the
yeah.
how to define. Yeah, that's
You choose a person, you choose a case, you choose a practice, you do an award, anyway, so we have sort of, yeah. You want me to go ahead or just,
Well, if we
or
can
we go to another?
wrap up with your group, did you have time to go into the examples from your institutions, or would you like to add something else that we all want to hear?
So on that one, number 2. Our institution provides a prize for people who, we ask people if they'd like to put in for the research integrity prize, and people will have a list of criteria. They put in their applications, a committee chooses, and we award them with a $5,000 monetary fund, which they have to use for research.
Monetary prize.
Except for holidays.
It's a good practice, but I guess some of the other institutions would have ideas about the implementation ability of this. But thank you, it's a very good one. And if we move to the group in the back, William's group, can you give us an example of how you chose to put some of the guidelines in the range?
just a few comments. So first thing that was clear was that actually for a lot of people it's not exactly clear what a behavioral nudge in the research context might mean. So it was a bit too abstract. But I think something that we discussed the longest was this question of champions of research ethics and integrity, and we found a lot of potentially problematic aspects to starting from the criteria and down to what it's. Can we say that it will actually have positive impact, and how can we claim such a thing that having a champion of ethics is going to impact, let's say, younger researchers or so. So we were thinking that maybe the solution is not to call somebody like an ethics or ethical champion, but broaden this into research practices or research integrity.
So that it would not necessarily be like a person, but like
that we discussed too. That maybe it could be unit or okay. But then the more general comment was also that maybe some of the material that's very, because the guidelines are now very sort of detailed and long. We were just looking at one section. Maybe it makes sense to go over them again and think what material to move to the manual and what material to do here, so that it's actually usable and feels accessible to the institutions that we want to send this to. So we don't want to get rid of the content, but we will have a manual so that the guidelines will be clearer, more accessible.
Thank you, Katri. So the recommendation is to revise and clarify.
By my group who talked about rehabilitation and reintegration of researchers. after research misconduct. So we spent a lot of time talking about 2.54 and 2.55, which was around research integrity bodies developing what it says clearly defined requirements for rehabilitation of researchers found to have committed research misconduct, and then implementing reintegration plans that are personalized and proportionate. And first of all, we felt that this could perhaps be better defined. We were conscious that a lot of these terms differ across contexts, and so actually in the first instance it would be really helpful to define the different terms used. But then when we looked at clearly defined requirements, we felt that it was important to note that rehabilitation might not always be appropriate, and to identify where there were thresholds after which potentially it was less about rehabilitation and more about sanctions, and that in general it would benefit from more examples here. In terms of the reintegration plans that are personalized and proportionate, again, we thought it was really great in principle. We wondered how it might work in practice. Who decides what is proportionate and personalized? For example, how do we ensure that it considers both sides, the person who is the subject of the concern or who committed the research misconduct, as well as the person who initiated it, and also consider the fact that there might be various biases involved, so ensuring that those committees were neutral. And then we had a wider conversation about how practical and feasible that might be when developing that at scale. So our feeling was that actually these could be really impactful, but it's all in the details, and we would really benefit from seeing some examples, and also noting that there's a really wide range of misconduct out there, and to note when it tips over from reintegration, rehabilitation into something potentially more along the lines of sanctions. In general, we also felt that the guidelines would benefit from perhaps being reorganized to be first and foremost looking at systems level changes through to organizational, and then at the individual level, whereas at the moment it feels like it's the opposite way, which perhaps unintentionally suggests that some of the material towards the bottom, which is about systems, is of lower importance.
We have the time to go to the 5 provisions. We skipped. We were completely. We didn't agree with number 3. We said no. This is a very bad rule. It says research ethics and research integrity procedures should be developed through collaborative process. Sorry. It's another one, number 2. Research RPOs, research performing organizations and research funding organizations, and discipline-specific organizations should tailor research integrity initiatives to specific needs and context of each discipline, recognizing that evaluations of consequences of research misconduct can differ significantly across the fields. We thought it was a very bad rule to leave that freedom between different disciplines. Mostly because, well, if you more and more we are forced or we are encouraged to work together between different disciplines, and if the rules in every discipline is different, then it's very likely to have lots of troubles in the end when you go make an article and put authors on it. If the rules are differently all over the place, it's very hard to have one set of good rules, we thought. That's one.
So let me clarify that it was the third one in your.
The second one, we said no.
So the second one was
agree.
bad, and you
Bad.
want to check it.
Yes.
But
But number 3,
the third one is
the third one is related to the first one,
Yes.
but so research ethics and research integrity procedures should be developed through collaborative processes, yes, with the research community, and remain adaptable. I said adaptable, okay, but they may not contradict the main set of rules. They can clarify or specify things to make it usable in every discipline. That's what we think was good. and I think we even put it in high feasibility and high impact. So it's a good rule, but it should be widely discussed. So even for all the disciplines together, it should be nationwide or Europe-wide maybe, and even for the disciplines, if you make adaptations, you may not contradict the main rule. It should also be broad. It should be a large common ground for it to be put into action.
Yes.
We have two good practices, one in the Netherlands and one in Belgium.
As examples, yeah.
As example, for the first one, for number one, starting to get a culture into research groups, a whole set of rules, and also one in Belgium. So there were two. Do you want them to elaborate on this, or
Just if you can quickly.
Maybe the person.
Yeah.
You could maybe. As you did.
About code of conduct, and in the Netherlands we have a Dutch code of conduct, and it's signed by a lot of research organizations, and in that code of conduct there is also some duties that institutions have. For example, provide training, provide research culture, and it really helps us to, as an institution, to pay attention.
Yes, so this like a deontological section in the guidelines can be beneficial. So I think the French might have a similar type of code also. But what about the Belgian?
In our case, we just next to the Charter for Researchers, where specific principles mentioned by Leopold are elaborated more. We also organize the equity that is also obligatory for PhD students. And we try to engage them in discussions and also to increase our visibility that we are there if you have questions. And,
Yes, thank you very much. These were excellent.
It's important to mention maybe that it's also only for PhD students because they are willing to do it, and it's hard to reach the senior
it's difficult to involve senior researchers.
Yes.
We are working on that.
And in some universities in Finland, we have like encompassing all the PhD students, they have to take the common research integrity class. So these are some suggestions to think about, and maybe more generally, I think there have been some great discussions all throughout the exercise, and I hope you can maybe continue throughout the conference in this groups or with each other, but I think for this exercise we are now done, and we thank every one of you, and I'll give the final word to Rose to
all your inputs, because in the end we want to come up with a document that is useful and that makes sense. We don't want a document where we say, well, this is very bad, such as, for example, and if you want to also to continue providing comments on the guideline, there's still time for that. I think we will reach out to all of you here in case you're interested still in giving more feedback. Yeah, but as it is, thank you, and it's really wonderful seeing you all. And I hope that we can also update you on what's happening in the project. Nice, thank you, and have a good day.